What's up guys, I'm BTC. The latest patch had massive game-changing nerfs to barriers, and we've seen a big shakeup in the meta. While some things are still shifting all around, and it's unclear which team comp is going to be the best, there are a few things that seem to be settling in. One of the biggest is in the DPS role, and it goes by the name of Hanzo. Let's take a quick walk down memory lane. For a long time, Hanzo was one of the worst DPS in the entire game. His attacks were slow, he had almost no escape, and the scatter arrow was more gimmicky than useful. However, after the rework, he immediately became the best mid-range DPS in the entire game. Combining this with the many nerfs that were happening to dive at that time, and for a short while after, we had what was the Hanzo Zarya meta, which was the Grab Dragon, and that was the best thing at the time. At least until Brigitte came out, and then it was nothing but goats for a very, very long time. With Sigma, we had double barrier, and anything that wasn't close range was pretty much garbage at that time. But that brings us to right now. Barriers have been nerfed, and once again, the powerhouse of Hanzo has been let loose. There's more than a few mid-range and long-range DPS, so why is Hanzo doing so much better than the rest? There's quite a few reasons, as it turns out. Let's start with barriers. They're way weaker and easier to break, so any medium-range DPS that's able to constantly attack the barrier is going to be able to destroy them pretty quickly. Even if it's not entirely destroyed, you might still be able to just force the tank to move off to the side and to get cover, thus leaving the rest of his team open to attack. This leaves the other players vulnerable, and characters like McCree, Soldier 76, and Ashe are much more reliant on barriers for protection than heroes like Hanzo and Widow. And this is because both Hanzo and Widow do not have any fall-off damage on their attacks, and therefore they can stay a little bit further behind and still deal maximum damage. That distance also gives them a slight degree of protection, as it makes it harder for the enemy to hit them, and when they do get hit, chances are the attack will have some kind of fall-off damage from it, and Hanzo and Widow will take reduced damage. So the barrier change is almost an entirely positive thing for Hanzo, whereas it's kind of a mixed bag for other DPS who rely more heavily on barriers for protection. Sure, those other characters can also deal more damage with the barriers out of the way, but they're also, again, more vulnerable, as I said, and Hanzo doesn't share that weakness. While it's true that most DPS are now able to quickly destroy the barrier, Hanzo has an ability that is particularly good at it. That being Storm Arrows. It's very easy for Hanzo to throw some regular attacks to weaken a barrier, and then use Storm Arrow to quickly destroy it. Another strategy is to wait until the barrier is destroyed and then use Storm Arrows. While the enemy is vulnerable, the Storm Arrow ability would be capable of dealing a massive amount of burst damage. Other characters like McCree, Soldier, Ashe don't really have that sort of a follow-up. Sure, Soldier can use his Helix, but I mean, that's the same damage as a normal Pharah attack. McCree could try to do a stun and fan combo, but that only works if he's really close range, which really isn't a great idea considering how weak the barriers are. The McCree needs to stay a little bit further back, be a little bit more defensive. You can't just front line it. And then Ashe, well, she just doesn't really have any attacks that provide a huge amount of burst. Yeah, you can use the TNT and stuff, but that's more of a damage over time as opposed to just, big bursting down enemy type damage. And then you have Widowmaker, who can do very well when the barriers have been destroyed. She can get those one-hit criticals, but Hanzo can also get those one-hit criticals. The difference being is that Hanzo can also help to destroy the barriers, whereas Widow is pretty bad at that. So you essentially have the barrier break of characters like Soldier 76 and McCree, and you also have the one-hit capability of Widow, all combined into one of Hanzo. So we have a character that is able to easily destroy barriers. He can do massive burst damage when the barriers are down. He gains a huge advantage from the nerf to barriers and almost no disadvantage, unlike other mid-range DPS. He also has the one-hit ability of a Widowmaker, and if that isn't enough, there is still yet more that Hanzo can do. he has the ability to grant vision in a small area from the sonic arrow. This is even more useful now because the barriers have been nerfed. This means that players must now use walls, corners, and other kinds of cover in order to get protection instead of only relying on the barriers. Having a character like Hanzo that allows you to see those enemies through the wall and around the corner gives you a massive advantage when those enemies finally decide to peek out from their hiding spot. You can wait and attack them the moment they pop out. This is a huge advantage that the other DPS don't have. And yet, there is still more. Hanzo doesn't necessarily have the best escape tools in the game, but the lunge and wall climb are still pretty good at evading enemies or simply repositioning himself for a different angle of attack. And then you also have to look at Widowmaker, who just got a nerf to her grappling hook, so her escape utility has been decreased a little bit, whereas Hanzo is still the same. And not to sound like some sort of late night infomercial, but with Hanzo, there is still yet more. His ultimate is incredibly powerful. This is made even more so now that Zarya has been getting used more often as well. The Grav Dragon combo is still one of the best in the entire game. If the enemy team is caught in one of those combos, there are only 3 things in the entire game that will save them. The first is Zenyatta's Transcendence. You better hope that there's no Ana throwing an anti. The second is Baptiste's Immortality Drone, which can probably get destroyed or baited out beforehand. And the third is Symmetra's Teleporter, and while both Zenyatta and Baptiste have a substantial increase in their pick rate with all the recent changes, I'll talk about that more in an upcoming video. As for Symmetra, she's fallen all the way back down to the bottom of the barrel, and it's unlikely you're going to have her in a match. So effectively, there are only 2 things that can keep the enemy team alive if they get caught in that combo. And I know that some people might think that Lucio's Sound Barrier will keep your team alive, but it's not going to. You can try it if you want, you're just going to end up wasting your ult, and the team is still going to get wiped. So effectively, you just have those 2 things. You have the Transcendence, and you have the Immortality Drone, and that's it. So if those aren't available, then the Grav Dragon is going to result in a team wipe. And the thing is, Hanzo can now build his ultimate even more quickly than he could before, because again, the barriers are not going to be there most of the time, so you're going to be doing an increase in damage. You're not wasting time hitting barriers, you're going to be hitting players, building your ult. Same thing goes with Zarya. She can build her ultimate a little bit faster now for the same reason. So essentially it boils down to this: you deal more damage, you build the ults faster, meaning the combos are more frequent. But wait, there's more! Right now the tank combos are not set in stone. However, the tanks mostly being used right now are Reinhardt, Orisa, Zarya, Sigma, Hammond, and Roadhog still thrown into the mix as well. The tanks that we're not seeing a lot of are Winston and D.Va. It appears that Hammond is now being prioritized as a pick over Winston and D.Va. So if you need someone to get into the backline rather than using Winston, people have been using more Hammond because he does have that massive extra health that he can give himself through the shield. And Winston is still getting a little bit of use, but D.Va is being dropped almost entirely. This is likely due to the numerous nerfs that the character got during GOATS comp, and the hero just hasn't recovered from it. Even the recent minor buffs that D.Va got just haven't been enough. Now, flipping over to the DPS side of things, Hanzo is going to have an advantage against nearly every other mid-range DPS character, and this is because he can get them with 1 hit, and it takes them multiple, whether it's Ashe, Soldier, McCree, whoever. They need to hit Hanzo several times, at least twice, and Hanzo can get them with only 1. The only character that Hanzo is at a disadvantage against is Widowmaker, and that's because she can also one-hit him, but she has a hit scan. So let's move on to the flanking DPS. Let's take a look at that. They really can't do much to Hanzo either. While Tracer is much better, and she's still a very good character, she doesn't have the vertical mobility required to chase down Hanzo. And then you have Doomfist, who's being used a decent amount, but he also struggles in the area of chasing down the Hanzo. Yes, Doomfist has the vertical mobility, but Hanzo can just kind of evade him. He can just kind of escape and go off and continue attacking from range, or just relocating and evading the Doomfist entirely. And Doomfist is just going to be much better off going after the supports instead of prioritizing the Hanzo anyways. Then you have characters like Reaper, who just don't stand a chance against Hanzo at all. I mean, you're not going to be able to chase down the Hanzo with a Reaper. It's just not going to happen. You can try to Shadow Step up top, you're just going to get destroyed, and when it comes to, you know, a one-on-one duel, the Hanzo's going to win, right? The Reaper is just not going to get close enough. And then you have the character that should be a good counter to Hanzo, which is Genji, but the thing is, Genji is just not good. He's just terrible at pretty much everything else. So even against Hanzo, he's become kind of lackluster, and he just has fallen behind by quite a bit, and he's just generally not worth using. So what we end up having with all of this is that the characters that should be countering Hanzo are not even being used because they were either nerfed too much, like D.Va, or they just fell behind, like Genji. And what that means is Hanzo is largely uncontested unless the enemy team is also running a Hanzo or a Widowmaker. After going through all of that, what we end up with is a DPS character that got almost exclusively positive changes from the barrier nerfs, is able to one-hit enemies, can easily break the barriers, provides a massive burst damage, has an almost invaluable X-ray vision tool, has pretty decent mobility and escape mechanics, has a very powerful damaging and zoning ultimate, and on top of that, the characters that most heavily counter him are not even being used. You've heard the phrase, a jack of all trades and a master of none. Well, Hanzo, he's kind of a jack of all trades and a master of quite a few. In the current state of the game, almost every team should be running Hanzo. Does this mean that there are going to be nerfs for Hanzo soon? I don't know. Blizzard does kind of tend to have these knee-jerk reactions to stuff like this, and it's entirely possible that they could go with that route. But I think a much better solution would be to make characters like Winston, D.Va, and Genji more useful so that they can better counter those long-range characters, because if Hanzo ends up getting nerfed into the ground, then Widow is just going to take his place. So there needs to be better balance. Genji and D.Va specifically need to be improved so that this sort of kind of backline dominance isn't so powerful. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.